My man.
Hey,
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm all
See
right.
you, man.
It is good to see you. It is good to see you. It's been a little bit. I think there are very few people who are watching this who are unfamiliar with you, but just for those few stray people who maybe not don't know who you are, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, Mike Learmonth. I was until May. I was editor in chief of Vice News. I worked for 7 years at Vice News, so through kind of three separate eras. That um, almost as long as you, Dexter. I think pretty close. We had the same kind of run
Yeah.
lengthwise, I think.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I had yeah. So I worked the last 7 years. I worked at Vice News, but prior to that, I had another life where I was a business reporter. And one of the things I covered as a business reporter was the business of media. And pretty soon after I started doing that, it very much became the business of digital media. So that's kind of my background. And being an editor making digital journalism, I also had a background in understanding kind of how the sausage gets made and how advertising sort of works on the web.
Yeah, which is going to be very relevant for our conversation today. Um yeah, I think I didn't realize you'd done business reporting until I think you maybe mentioned it on one of the streams that we did back at Vice at some point.
I try to keep it a secret. I don't advertise it.
Really? Really? Why?
Just kidding.
Why?
No, I'm just teasing. I'm just teasing because it was so different than what I was doing at Vice. But the big thing about Vice for me was it was just amazing to have a chance to do something different in my career, right? So like
Hmm.
do something entirely different, which was really really gratifying and amazing. But yeah, so I started out. My first national reporting job was at a magazine called The Industry Standard, and
Hmm.
when I landed there, they said, "Okay, you're going to cover music and you're going to cover travel." And I thought, oh, okay, because I'd come out of the alternative press. I'm like, okay, I'm the alt weekly guy, so they're going to make me cover the soft stuff. But
Yeah.
what I quickly learned was like that was not the soft stuff. Like Napster was like landing like a bomb,
Yeah.
into the world, and digital media was um, about to go through some pretty incredible changes. So um, yeah, I quickly learned that was actually a great assignment, and that was sort of my introduction to a lot of these issues. And then I covered media at Reuters, at Variety, and Business Insider and Advertising Age. So I kind of saw all of it kind of begin in the early 2000s, and then sort of a lot of the shit hitting the fan in the tens, and then leading up to where we are now, which I think is sort of an interesting and also weird place.
But a lot of times, the quote unquote entertainment stuff seems like it's going to be the soft stuff. And this is why I never like using the phrase entertainment when somebody asks me what I do. I say I do culture. Um, but yeah, it seems like, oh yeah, all you do is so interview a celebrity and then you ask them how their day went and what their favorite food is and their favorite color, and then everybody goes home and you write this nice puff piece and everybody's happy. No, if you take it at all seriously, this is where a lot of the wild stuff is really happening, and what people can consider just entertainment. Music, all these other things. There's so much moving around behind the scenes, and it ends up truly, truly affecting just how we live our lives in general. The kind of information we get, and you get a kind of a preview of that. I mean, if you're paying attention to Napster when Napster was going wild, I think that's a preview for a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff. A lot of money moving around.
I totally agree with you, and I actually think the definition of news needs to be broader, right? You think of news as um, narrowly, and that's like really doing a disservice to news because you can cover entertainment from the red carpet of the Gold Globes. You can also write stories that tell us, that explain the world through culture and the transmission of stories and information and art, right? So um, yeah, I mean, I think it's a very. I think that's actually kind of a problem with internet and news today. There's been sort of a narrowing of what people consider quote unquote news,
Yeah.
when it should be extremely broad. And I think actually that was one thing that Vice was pretty good at, was embracing a tons of different topics and formats and ways of kind of relating the news that was that were innovative. Yeah.
Yeah, man. So let's start with the background. So we're here to talk about something that seems really nebulous, I feel like, but I think there is a perception that the news is somehow getting worse. And I think a lot of people have maybe that feeling for different reasons. But what I don't think people would necessarily expect would be that journalists would also feel that way, that the news is getting worse, right?
Yeah, so I definitely feel that way. I think a lot of journalists feel that way, but it's actually really interesting to hear what non-journalists think about it, right?
Hmm.
I think that there's a couple things that have happened. I mean, obviously, journalism employment has plummeted. Um, I think a third of all journalists at quote unquote newspapers, right? So that's a proxy for the whole media landscape, have been eliminated since 2008. Something like 70% of ad revenue has gone away since then. I think that a lot of publications that used to be extremely broad and do a wide diversity of stuff have really narrowed. I mean, I think the LA Times is actually a pretty good example of that. Um, I'm not a person who says, "Oh, it was always better before, or it was always great in the
Right.
past," because no, it wasn't always great. But I think it's a fact that a lot of the great metro newspapers are very diminished from what they were. And a lot of the great alt weeklies are mostly gone, right?
Oh, yeah.
Or there in name only, right? So
Yeah.
so I mean, I think, like, my hometown paper, the New York Times, right?
Okay.
So they don't actually cover New York, really. Like, I mean, I couldn't learn, say, what's happening in my Lower East Side zip code, from the New York Times, right? So that's where I think, even if you live in a highly served, media dense area, you might still also actually be living in a news desert, because there's no like economic model for a Lower East Side paper, right? There are a few blogs that are great,
Yeah.
but there are very few professional journalists like going to meetings and doing the kind of reporting that used to happen.
Yeah. It's, I mean, and I just want to re-underline this, right? Is that I think that there are various reasons why somebody might say the news sucks, or the news is worse than it used to be, or back in the day it used to be better. And a lot of these things I would disagree with, right? Oh, news back in the day it used to be unbiased. I don't know about that, buddy. Yeah, yeah,
It
you
was
shaking your
very
head.
biased.
Yeah, no, it was terrible. It was there were things that were genuinely terrible about
Right.
the news. And I think, you've been in the game a little bit longer than I have, but I would even say there were things that I'm glad I didn't have to deal with when I first got in, and that, like, I'm glad those things were gone before I ever stepped in. And there are also things that have changed since I started that I'm glad that the next person doesn't have to deal with. Like, I'm glad about that. I've said this before. When I was at the LA Times, I had an editor who would not let me use the word racist in an article. Wasn't allowed to
Oh
use the
wow.
word. Yeah.
That was a wall that really got broken down, right? Like, you
Yeah.
could start saying people lied, right? That was with
Yes.
Trump. you
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
um,
And it's like, yo, sometimes people lie. Sometimes people are
yeah.
racist. And they didn't just start being racist and liars in 2020. They were racist and liars in 2019 and 2017 and 26. Like, you know what I mean? And so, like,
Yeah.
I'm glad that, so there are things that are, I think we can certainly differ with some people, right? On, hey, the news is bad because of this. No, 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 no. Actually, I think you're looking at it in a different way here. I think there's another way to look at this, and actually, some things have improved. But it is interesting to see that there are places where also journalists would say, "Nah, man, the news is getting worse. The stuff we're giving you, that we're spending our time out here, has gotten worse, fundamentally worse, which is, if everybody agrees with this, where the heck are we?
I actually am encouraged when people care enough to say that the news is bad or care enough to criticize it.
I love it too.
That's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that's to me, I mean, let's take it really far back, right?
Mm,
Before the era of big journalism, right? Which really is only about 50 years old, say.
yeah.
But the world, the American landscape was full of tiny little papers with agendas owned by people who were using them to settle scores and do stuff. And, it was this idea of the marketplace of ideas where somewhere in the wash, right, would be like the truth, right?
Yes.
Or, but you would have to be a very discerning consumer. You might be subscribing to things that confirm your worldview or serve you in some way. But the world of journalism and information was quite big and broad and diverse and not always very professional, right? So I think in some ways we're back to that. But
Mm,
my concern is like just I often feel like there's just not enough great content out there. And I feel like I mean I don't know if readers feel that way, but that's how I feel as a consumer.
yeah. So the big thing that I wanted to talk to you about is brand safety. There's so much we can get into.
Yeah, so let me just, if I could, I'll just give you a little bit of background on what
Yeah.
this is because I think it's confusing to a lot of people, but people should know about it because it's affecting what you get to read every day.
Mm,
So let's take it back to turn of the century, right? Like magazines, newspapers were very innovative, right? They were eagerly putting their content on the web and also putting a version of their business model on the web, right? The online ad, right?
mhm.
In the beginning, if you were an advertiser, you were buying directly from a chain of newspapers or a local paper or a TV station or a chain of stations or a network. You were buying all that, right? Through
Mm.
an agency. So the internet comes along and then they invent the cookie, this thing that allows you to buy audiences across the web. Hey, seems great, very efficient. I get to reach my audience wherever they are. They might be on a news site, they might be on a cooking site, they might be somewhere else.
So
And
back me up a little bit if you could. The cookie
yeah,
thing. So I think I get it, but maybe we can break it down even further for everyone. So basically, at the beginning, let's say, I'm a breakfast cereal, and I've decided that, look, the people who read the New York Times, I think they're a good audience for my breakfast cereal. I'm gonna go to the New York Times and say, hey, listen, every time y'all drop an article, I want to make sure my breakfast cereal is at the top of the site. Or maybe I'm going to an agency who's going to say, okay, look, you got a breakfast cereal. I'm going to make sure that you're the New York Times and the Washington Post. And, every other time somebody opens up an article on there, they're going to see your breakfast cereal, no problem. Cookie, how does that change that?
so that's really interesting the way you put it that way because what the cookie allowed you to do is say, oh, I want to reach the New York Times audience. I can actually buy that audience when they're somewhere else, right? Like I can follow them across the web and buy that audience where they happen to be, whether it's
Mm,
like, um, you know, people aged 18 to 34 making a certain amount of money, people who are interested in, I don't know, like cars or in the market for something. You could slice and dice the audience any way you want and buy them anywhere you want. That was the big innovation and I think at the time, the media thought, oh, this is going to be great for us because we're the ones with the audience, we're the ones with the brands, we're the ones who are going to get the biggest part of this pie at the end of the day because we're supplying all the quality to the internet, right?
right.
But it kind of didn't end out that way. So I
Mm,
think that was the initial thing. By the way, at the same time, they're putting all their content on the web for free, and a decade later, they would have to sort of like say, okay, we're not going to do that. And at that point, they were begging people who perhaps had never paid for content or never paid, certainly for news, to start to do that again, which was really tough.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, you just talked about Napster, man. I mean, that put us, we got in a weird, look at how hard the music industry, all the things that they went through is because for a while it was easy. It was genuinely easier to bootleg music
Oh, yeah,
than to get
100%.
it normally. Like when I realized, look, I'm a broke teenager and there are things that my local CD shop does not have, and I can just click some buttons. Hell yeah, let's go. Now
Yeah.
then later, obviously, what kind of sidebar here, but later, obviously, you get things like Spotify, which make it so that you don't have to download a virus along with the Metallica album or what have
Yeah.
you. I could pay $9 and I can have all the music I ever want, and I don't have to get a virus, and I'm not crashing my mom's computer and getting in trouble. You know what? This is an okay trade-off. Same thing with
Yeah.
Netflix. Like, I can watch Breaking Bad and I don't have to get grounded. Mm,
I mean, in the
okay,
beginning, I
yeah.
think it was great for consumers, great
Exactly.
for users,
Exactly.
no doubt about that. But I think like, Napster. I mean, look, Spotify is amazing. I mean, Spotify gets my $15, $16 a month, no matter what, every month. That's going to the music industry. And hey, did I?
Not the artist, but the music industry.
Yeah, exactly. But just to take it back to advertising for a second, like so you've got this system now, and then Google started buying these companies that were middlemen to the digital ad business. One big one was called DoubleClick, and a brand would put money in, and the machines would decide where the ads get fired, and that made advertisers, I think, rightfully very nervous because they weren't super in control over where those ads landed. So the brand safety industry sort of grew up to say like, oh, if you contract with us, we'll give us another, a cut of what's being spent here. We'll assure that your ads won't appear next to unsettling content or things that you wouldn't want to be, associated with, right? So unfortunately, a lot of that was done via keyword blocking, and that really hit news, right? So immediately it hit news. And I'm talking about something that happened more than 10 years ago. And even today, it's a real struggle to get brands to not keyword block, say Gaza, abortion, Trump, right? Big picture, what's happening. This is my biggest concern is advertising has been part of journalism like since the very beginning, right? Since printed newsletters, in early America, a key part of our democracy, right? A key part of transmitting information of the way the fourth estate operates. But brands have really abandoned the news in a really significant way. And I just think it's like, I think there's really no reason to do that. There's no great science that says that an ad next to unsettling content is actually have any impact on that ad at all. What happened, when the ad world went digital, it also went quote unquote science, right? Like, so the Mad Men got replaced by the Math Men, and everything was like scientific, but that's like kind of a mirage because there's really no cognitive research on the impact of an ad. Like the big example everyone uses, and I've heard a version of this for 20 years, and I was just on a panel and someone brought it out, is imagine a Delta ad next to a story about a plane crash, or let's say an Alaska Airways ad next to the story about an Alaska, the Max 9 that had the door blown off, or the part of its fuselage blown off. Wouldn't that be terrible, right? That almost never happens. So you've got a whole industry built on like that worst case scenario.
Right.
And B, even if it did happen, is that so bad? Like, you saying that readers don't understand what an ad is and don't understand like that there's no connection between those two things. So I think it's like wrong on a bunch of levels. And honestly, I was just on a panel with some extremely senior, in control of a lot of money type ad people, and they were still trotting out examples like that. And I'm like, wait, well, let's just interrogate this for a second, because I've been hearing a version of this for like literally decades. Is that real? Like, is that really harmful? Is that really going to hurt? Is that worth defunding the news over that? Because you're scared of that, right? Like, I just don't think it is.
Man, okay, first off, rewind a second. The Mad Men were replaced by the Math Men. That's kind of a bar, man.
Didn't make that up. If you go to an ad conference starting 10 so years ago, everybody was saying that. But I love to take credit for it because it is good. But
Still,
yeah, I mean, you look
yeah.
at, so what took over in the ad world were, people on the technical side or people on the analytics side. The creatives were sort of pushed away, right? So the creatives, it used to be in the Mad Men world, Don Draper was a creative, right?
Mhm.
He came in and he's like, carousel, right? Like he had the idea, right? But the today's ad world is about the dominant figures are ones trying to leverage technology to make ads cheaper or more effective, right? And that's sort of like a dismal science. It's not a creative science. There's some creativity in it, but it's not the same as storytelling, right? Advertising used to be about storytelling.
Mhm.
This is more about efficiency.
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, I feel like there are people who have made livings on telling you that they know what's in the black box, and it's like, I'm not 100% sure you know about this, man. But hey, whatever. Um, so I mean, there's an entire industry about this, right? Which is helpful in some ways, and then I think in some ways, as you're describing, not
Yeah,
always
it's
helpful.
not. It's not like, I don't think it's not, what do you call it, malicious. It's not.
Sure,
It does.
yeah.
It means well, right? But I think that if journalism has to die so these guys can justify their existence, the gathering of news is expensive. So anyone who does that has a cost behind what they're doing that's much higher than a website. One of the links I gave to you is the proliferation of made for advertising sites. These are sites that get put up, and like a lot of them are AI at this point. They get put up in a category that's very ad friendly, like say gadgets, tech, climate, um, celebrity coverage, you name it.
Yeah.
And those look to the ad tech world, to the cookie world, those look the same as the news, right? And they're valued the same because they're buying the person, not the site itself.
Mhm.
So that's pushed the cost of everything down for the advertiser. It's pushed revenue down. I'll tell you, just from Vice, our programmatic ads, the ads that are placed by machines on the website, were just not a big revenue driver for us. And honestly, with keyword blocking, Vice did a lot of coverage of extremists, right wing folks, Trump,
Yeah.
international conflicts, trafficking, drugs. None of that all of that would be blocked by advertisers, right? So, like,
This
literally,
is wild. I mean, so essentially, I'm sorry, I just got to jump into here. Keyword blocking, I think, is something we should get into, right? So this is where we're really getting into what the idea of brand safe is, and so what you're saying is that there are. Well, I know this is more complicated, but I'll give you the simple version. That there are advertisers, that there are brands who have decided that I don't want my product, I don't want my breakfast cereal or my car being advertised in an article that mentions Trump. I don't want it. Just don't do it.
so a lot of that's decided by the agency and by
Yeah.
the brief, right? And like, I don't even think the brands even have a say in it anymore, because what's happening is the chief CMO, chief marketing officer of a lot of these brands, is not really a major figure anymore. They've been sort of subverted a little bit. So I think that, like, a lot of agencies are running scared, and what they don't want, they're almost like trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist,
Mhm.
or avoid getting that angry phone call at 4 a.m. That's like, why did I just see my ad next to a story about abortion, right?
Right.
Which takes back to Jezebel. Like, why did I see my ad on Jezebel, right? And they don't want to have to explain that. And I think that's a problem because, you know like, I think the message, if agencies had more of a backbone, they would say, hey, you're going to advertise in news because Jezebel's readers are affluent and they're well read and they are concerned about the world. And this is an important issue. And they're a valuable audience. And Jezebel is performing a service to this valuable audience. So we can ally with Jezebel and serve this very important group for us instead of targeting them later when they're reading about food or something on another site.
Mm-hmm. So let's maybe take a look at this 404 article, which I think might be kind of instructive to take a look at. This is an article simply titled "Advertisers Don't Want Sites Like Jezebel to Exist." Shout out to Jason and Emmanuel.
It's a really good headline. I mean, it's right on the money. It's not wrong. That's the thing. It's not wrong.
I actually already subscribed to 404, which I recommend. 404 is doing some very quality stuff, which we can come back to in a second.
Agree. Yeah, they're doing great.
For those of you who did not know, Jezebel, which is a really well-known site, actually, which very, very broadly speaking, covered issues pertinent to women, which is kind of everything. But that's the easiest way I could describe it to somebody who's never ever heard of Jezebel. It gets more in depth, more interesting than that. But that's the easiest way I could describe it to somebody who's never heard of Jezebel. So Jezebel is shut down by its parent company. Staff is laid off, and the reasoning given is that brand safety, I'm reading from the site here, brand safety, the fact that advertisers don't want to be next to the type of content that Jezebel was publishing was one of the biggest factors that led to the parent company to stop publishing the site and lay off all of its staff. And actually, previously, the ad sales team had asked if it could remove Jezebel's tagline, which was sex, celebrity, politics with teeth. So, is that a good idea? And I think, is that a good idea? But also, I think maybe this answers another one of the questions of, you're saying, well, people don't want to advertise, or there's an industry now that has convinced itself, maybe that's a better word, and convince others to not put ads on things that are deemed quote unquote sensitive, which we'll get into. What are the consequences of that? Well, potential consequences is an entire site going under, an entire staff of journalists who worked very well together to provide this kind of service for you, no longer having that ability to do so. That is one of the potential consequences of it, a site going away.
Yeah, I think this is really puzzling, I have to say. I mean, because if you think about, Jezebel had a couple eras of excellence, right? They were great when they launched, and I thought they were on a great run when Laura Bassett was the editor most recently. So I think the brand is amazing. It has a history of doing impactful stories and coverage on things that really matter.
Mm-hmm.
And it had a really devoted audience, like really loyal. Like,
yeah,
I guarantee you, if you wore, not me, but somebody wore a Jezebel sweatshirt, t-shirt to the dog park, there would be conversations, right? Like,
yes,
if you wore a CNN t-shirt to the dog park, no conversations. If you wore a Jezebel t-shirt, somebody's going to talk to you about it.
That's actually a great question, because it's a great thing that you mentioned, because there really are, and I think we should underline this, right? There are news brands that will get you that kind of reaction. Go up with an MSNBC shirt, go up, frankly, a Fox News hat. Like, maybe somebody will look at you, but you're not going to get a real conversation out of it. But there are some, like, pull up. It depends on where you at, right? But, Jezebel, I would say Vice. I would say, like, walk up with a Wall Street Journal sweater on, like an NPR tote bag. Like, that's not going to do that much for you, man. And that's even kind of stereotypical. Yeah, so
the only reason I give that anecdote is that once in a while during the pandemic work from home era, I actually did forget and wear like a Vice hoodie to the dog park to walk my dog. And I'll tell you, I forget that I had it on, and then people would come up and they'd want to chat.
Really?
And man, and then but like what was amazing to me about that was, here's a news brand that's also a lifestyle brand. And I
Hmm.
think that's the secret sauce. That's what Vice had that was pretty unique, and what was frustrating about their inability to make that work as a business. I think Jezebel has that.
Yeah.
I think other places have that, and I think when you get that, there's some magic there, because it's not just about the news and information. It's about, these people are on my side. They're here for me, and I consider, like, these are my people, right? Like,
Hmm. Yeah.
culturally,
Hmm.
just sort of from a POV standpoint. And this is, I think, the thing that the ad world is missing, is to ally with media brands that people have emotional connections to. I mean, why wouldn't you want to do that? That's like, I think the most, if you're an advertiser, you're fundamentally a storyteller. You're a storyteller about this product, and you want to be in an environment where people really want that content. And that was what was so frustrating, because we would have advertisers come in at Vice, and they would be like, "Oh, we love you. We love what you're doing. Hey, can you make us content about this?"
You're right. You're right. I think there are things that I think people genuinely feel tied to, and this is one, Jezebel being one that people really felt tied to, and it just got tanked because of brand things like phrases like brand suitability and brand safety. So maybe we could talk about there's a paragraph in here in this article. I'm just going to read this out. It is not an exaggeration to say that the largest companies in the world are colluding to put their thumb on the scales of what types of news is monetized and which types of news is monetized at lower rates or not monetized at all. The World Federation of Advertisers, WFA, is listed by the World Economic Forum as one of its projects and includes every major marketing agency as well as brands like Nike, Merck, Nestle, Procter & Gamble, TikTok, Disney, Walmart, Adidas, BP, Shell, Goldman Sachs, Electronic Arts, McDonald's, and more. Represents 90% of all advertising dollars spent in the entire world, 900 billion in spend per year. And this WFA, the World Federation of Advertisers, wrote in a blog post that the risks are rising for big brands. The risks are rising because of today's geopolitics marked by polarization and the accompanying 24/7 newsreel. So essentially, the idea being here that this is a large group of the biggest brands, biggest companies in the world that are saying we are now at risk. Our business model is at risk because there is polarization in the news, which is kind of a wild thing to think about. So it sounds like a genuine conspiracy theory.
So let's talk about this for a second, because it is true that the remaining news out there is more polarized. And why is that? That is a direct result of two things. One is that social distribution rewarded emotional content, right? It rewarded whatever confirmed your bias, whatever you want to dunk on that day, that headline performed, right? So that's one thing. So social, algorithmic social, did in fact amplify our divisions and amplified content that confirmed basically extreme content, or
Right,
content that
right.
was very opinionated, right? So that delivered a lot of clicks to those sites. The second thing is the cookie-based advertising world, where everything looks the same to the advertiser, and that actually monetized those sites. So those sites are monetized in a way that they were never before, when there was direct buying of news organizations. So what you have is you do have, so basically this is a monster that the ad world created, right? And now they're complaining about it. And it's like, it's pretty rich. It's pretty funny to sort of see how that kind of played out over the years. but it is true. And I think that there are some interesting solutions out there that could help with that. I mean, one of them is, hey, why don't you start doing like a white list of news brands and just buy them, right? Like that seems pretty simple. There are a couple companies out there. One's called Adfontes Media, which I did some consulting for over the summer. One's called NewsGuard, that are sort of rating news sites based on bias and reliability, um, and sort of giving them a little bit of a seal of approval, like brands can be safe here, right? I think those are interesting initiatives that could funnel more brand dollars back to news. I'll tell you, it has to happen. Like it can't. The alternative is I think unacceptable for society. I mean, if you go to any like ad conference, and trust me, I've been to a bunch, people are all too ready to criticize the quality of the content and the news that's out there. And I just want to say, like, yeah, so do something about it. It's the business model of last resort. Um, Look, I mean, publishers, right? Publishers need to build products. They need to have subscribers. They need to do a lot of innovating on their own. Ads are not the solution to this, right? They're just part of the problem. But I think, you've got this like, the social revolution, search, the fact that Google and Facebook built just much more effective ad systems than publishers ever could,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's a problem. And now you've got AI, like, training up, you know, their large language models on all this expensive content, you know, doing it like, not asking permission, just doing it, and I guess hoping they'll win in court or hoping they'll get a good deal in the end. But it's like, man, content just can't catch a break, right? This is yeah. I don't know if you looked at the New York Times lawsuit against OpenAI. It's
Yeah, yeah,
fascinating.
yeah.
I don't know, if you've been on a search engine lately, if you want to use the AI results, it's pushing down the Google results even further, the blue links that is sort of the lifeblood of the internet economy. And those AI search results, for the most part, have no links in them at all. So like, you saw the latest traffic numbers, I think late last year, were pretty bad for content across the industry. Just like numbers are crashing.
I'm a read from this article again. So okay, in 2019, a WFA group called the Global Alliance for Responsible Media, GARM, published the Brand Safety Floor and Suitability Framework, a document that helps guide how brands approach brand safety and suitability. So, this framework states that discussion of debated social issues and related acts in negative or partisan context is of high risk, and breaking news and op-ed coverage is medium risk. I want to say this again. Discussion of debated social issues and related acts in negative or partisan context. Here's the thing. What is a debated, sensitive social issue? And the document doesn't actually describe that. And here's the problem. There are a lot of things that a lot of people think are debated social issues right now. There are also things that have been debated social issues in the past, like should women be able to vote? Should people with certain skin tones be able to vote? Should children be working in factories or not? These at one time were very hotly debated, sensitive social issues. And that would have meant in those contexts that I'm not saying what happens is these things cannot be written about, and it sounds like I'm making a couple of jumps here, but what I'm doing here is I'm saying that here is what my concern would be, and you tell me if this concern makes sense. Because what it sounds like here is that it sounds like there's kind of this middleman, I suppose, agency or consortium that is making the essentially decision here that if basically what it sounds like here is that if somebody is writing about something that is sensitive, companies will not want to advertise on those articles or on those videos or whatever the case may be. And if that happens, then at some point that kind of reporting will get deprioritized, defunded,
That
and it just
reporting's
won't
going to
happen.
go away.
It'll just
Yeah,
go away. Yeah.
it'll go
They'll yeah.
away. Like, I mean, I think Vice was, I think, very, you know, I was never pressured to do fewer Trump stories, right? I was never pressured to do fewer challenging stories, which I appreciated. And that was partly because our ad model, we just didn't, it wasn't like we were going to lose much by just staying brand friendly, and our audience would go away. So there was really no point in doing it. But I think, that document's really important. And it's one of those sort of unseen, who wrote it, how they come up with that.
Yeah.
And because it's taken seriously, and it's used for, the underpinning framework of brand safety all over the industry. And that is a doomsday document for news right there. And because, like you say, I mean, look at what Jezebel was doing day in, day out. Like, they were writing about really important issues that, there isn't like a consensus on abortion in this country. There's a lot of people who say it should be illegal, right?
Yeah.
But
I mean,
like,
there are words like there are block lists essentially on these brand safety block lists. Hey, here's if you want to be in the safe zone, don't let your work appear in any articles that include these words. And some of those words are things like transgender or gay.
100% wrong.
Just like, gotta be kidding me, man.
Yeah, gotta be kidding me. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think
like you
Jason
cannot
was right
write about gay people positively, negatively, like whatever. You can't have an article where you've written about somebody and say, hey, yeah, I don't know, they've made an album and they're gay, and let me move on with the rest of the discussion about whether I think their drum programming is good and how I like their violins or I don't like their violins, whatever. That is gone. It's as simple as that. This is that sounds sort of simple and petty, but then it also gets into the, hey, there's a law there's somebody's trying to attempt to pass a law that could be really, really damaging. I guess we just shouldn't cover it because we might not get paid to do this. Like you say, advice. And again, we should back up here because this is a large question that I get, that I've seen people ask is, hey, is it true that there are companies dictating what you cover? That somebody's telling you what to cover and what not to cover? My personal answer for that is I've never had that happen to me, and I've never even had the suggestion of that happen to me. The closest that anybody has ever come to that is, I covered a movie and I I would bring up some things, and then the PR people would get upset about it, and they'd say, we don't like what you said, and I'd say, too bad, it's true. I don't know what to tell you, buddy. And if you don't want to invite me back to watch your next movie, hey, that's on you, whatever. That's about as far as I ever went. But and I would assume your experience is similar, but this is something where a middleman can put the thumb on the scale a little bit and make sure that certain things aren't really talked about.
Yeah. I mean, one amazing aspect of being at Vice was the head of sales, Scott Hendrickson, was really great. Like, he's just a great lover of journalism. And, he was like, it's not like you can make that document go away, but you can, but he knew not to bring us deals that we wouldn't be able to do. And he advocated for the brand in the marketplace. I think there's not a ton you can do, and I think Jezebel ran up against that. I actually think, look, the management problems at Geo Media, which own Jezebel, are another situation. I mean, I would love to own Jezebel. I think Jezebel would be an amazing property. Someone has actually bought it, so it's going to have another life. So we shouldn't talk about like it's dead. It's around, and it's going to be. I suspect it'll be great again, right? but I think it's about educating the advertising world, and also positioning yourself as an ally to your audience, right? Like I've thought about, every day when we were covering stuff, well, what do our readers want to know about this? How can we serve our readers
Especially
with great
give them
stuff?
stuff they're not getting from other places.
Yeah, yeah, to the extent we could, yeah, absolutely. Really, the ad world needs to think more in those terms too. Like, how can we help enable a content ecosystem that's really serving the community? There's some risk, sure. There's some risk in that. Like maybe you'll be on an article that you don't agree with, like big deal, right? You're advertising like across the web, millions of ads. I think you just need to have a thicker skin, and understand that democracy requires that we have like a strong ad supported news ecosystem out there. And you don't want to live in a world where that doesn't exist. So the example I give is the Bud Light stuff. Bud Light didn't do anything to deserve what happened to them. And that was all driven by partisan news outlets. Um, so you can ignore the news, you can defund the news, you can walk away from the news, but sooner or later the news is going to come for you, because what's going to be left is this ecosystem of partisan outlets that are here to dunk on you.
Okay, hold on.
And
Let me unpack that. What you're saying is, but Bud Light, they have a trans influencer, showing their product, and then all these right-wing people start saying, "Let's get rid of Bud Light." And you're saying that's because they allowed those outlets to flourish? Like that's reaping.
well, not they specifically, but the ecosystem that was privileged by social media and largely allowed to thrive in this world is the partisan news ecosystem. There was a while Fox News was we actually were really early on in identifying this. Fox News was the number one news publisher on Facebook for a long time. People didn't understand that. They were number one. So Facebook really became sort of like a boomer, sort of like talk radio medium.
Yeah.
And that really benefited Fox, right? So I think, so it's not that Bud Light, although Bud Light's part of Anheuser-Busch, giant conglomerate, it's not that Bud Light did that, created this. It's the ad world created it. And it's not just Bud Light. Like you look at the Dodgers, they came for the Dodgers, and was it some like trans night that they were having? It's like no brand was safe. Like no brand is safe from this stuff. So I think the anecdote to this is you got to defund the crap, not keyword block, but defund partisan news out there that's just there to like amplify controversy and fund reporting. And they got to find a way to do that.
Okay, so and I'm hearing what you're saying is, you don't want to live in a world where this sort of stuff happens, right? That democracy is important, and advertisers, brands should grow some thicker skin and be willing to stand up for that. Which I hear what you're saying. Counterpoint. Let me play devil's advocate here, by which I mean let me play capitalist advocate here. What if you're just trying to make money and you just say, look, it's not my responsibility as a brand to make sure that democracy is upheld, that the world moves in a positive direction. My responsibility is make some money, and I'm scared of having my ad placed on something that is explaining what is happening in Palestine, or is explaining what happened with gun control in the United States, or is explaining what is happening with people, harassing trans people. Put me next to the one about top 10 gardening tips. That's where I want to be. And that's all I want to be.
So if you're Bud Light, you can't win by just selling beer to conservatives. You can't win by just selling beer to white people or white men, right? You got to sell beer to everybody if you want to win in your Bud Light. So I think that's like a built-in incentive to be diverse in everything you do, like from your staff to your creative to places you advertise. So I mean, I think there's a built-in incentive for that, and I think like the impact of this whole quote unquote scandal, because it wasn't a scandal. It was a made up thing that got Bud canceled on a few websites. Honestly, it's nothing. And really what they should have done is completely ignore it and move on. But the bigger thing happened to Bud Light is like Dos Equis kicked their ass last year. They had better ads, right? Like, so I mean, like, that's the bigger story there, and it had nothing to do. Like Dos Equis ads were incredible, right? They were inspirational. They were about the immigrant experience. They were, almost cinematic, and I think that's a good example of like, just, hey, they got their butts kicked in the marketplace, and it had nothing to do with that campaign.
Well, but I think also what you're talking about here is you're talking about, again, sort of creating an environment where only very middle of the road milk toast news even exists, and then that allows for your company essentially at some point being able to become a target if you do anything out of the norm. And but it's a kind of a long range view that you're talking about, that is the industry even able to conceive of that or take that seriously? Because what I'm seeing is a lot of really short-term decisions being made.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's like, I think the average, there are stats on this. The average tenure of a CMO is like a couple of years, right? They don't have, they don't have like a lot of runway. They're doing their best. They've got very short-term view. It's a quarterly results view. And I think that what gets lost is the long view, making mistakes. Hey, you might make some mistakes, right? Telling great stories and really investing in your audience, right? And for a huge global brand, you gotta be loved. You want to be loved by everybody. You want to be loved in minority communities and in trans communities and gay, straight, whatever. You have to have like a really strong business all those places. And you can't let a few trolls and a few websites and a few news shows knock you off that ultimate goal. I think it's a big mistake. I mean, I think they have, like, what's making all of this worse is the partisan news environment that gets left when you subtract, when you defund the news, when you defund, real journalism. So, I think it's like a vicious cycle, and what we need is, marketers to have like just a thicker skin and like a bigger picture idea of what they should be doing in society.
Here's where I have difficulty with that. It was again, I totally see what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
What we're essentially asking for is for marketers, bunch of people who went to, got MBA at, an elite business school, to recognize value that news is providing to democracy, to society, and say, you know what, I'm going to take a risk partially on moral standing, partially on contribution to society. I agree. And I also think that, look, scared money don't make money. No risk, no return. These are actually true things. But, look, economy's not doing well, and a lot of people are playing very conservatively. And I mean, lowercase c, conservatively. They're not trying to take risks. They're not trying to take big swings. And so us making this appeal, it seems like a tough sell. You know what I mean? It seems like a tough sell. But I'm also curious, man, you've been to a brand safety conference?
Oh, tons. Yeah, I used to cover this stuff.
But you were just at one recently. Didn't you speak on one?
I did.
That was okay. Listen, y'all got to understand at home. This is how this started. Was I saw you post on LinkedIn that you went to a brand safety conference, and I thought, what is this man doing here? They're either gonna eat you alive or you're gonna eat them alive. This seems like you're going with your fists up, man. What was this like? Why are you there?
It was wild. I mean, the reason I got invited is because I had recently left Vice, and they were like, "Oh, here's a publisher that is really, a great example of, an interesting example of, this issue, right?" So that's why I got invited, and So I was like, yeah, I'd be happy to. And it was fun. I mean, I learned a few things at it. I mean, I think that, I'm not saying that, like, I'm not saying that their concerns are completely invalid, right? There's
Mhm.
certainly some valid concerns. Honestly, you look at that document that you just read from, and you look at the things that it's stipulating. Like, how would you in practice really enact any of that? Like, it's impossible. It's very, very tough. So I mean, um, I think they're way, way too sensitive, and they're too careful, and they're not looking at the impact of defunding the news, and actually, frankly, they're not looking at the opportunities, right? Like, imagine some brand that really invested in Jezebel, right? Like, that could be really great for them, right? The right brand.
Mhm.
I remember Levi's did a big deal with Vice, um, for some content we were doing a few years ago. We did that great series, Peabody winning series, Transnational.
Mhm.
That was, I think it was Target was a sponsor on that. So I mean, there are brands out there doing underwriting really important work, but I think that, you know the sort of big wave blocking and tackling of just general advertising,
Mhm.
it's got to come back to news. It's because there's no reason to leave. And honestly, like, news audiences are great and they're cheap. So they should come back. And somebody's going to get this right, and somebody's going to take a risk, and there's probably a big win on the other end of it.
So let me ask. So I've gotten a bunch of questions on. I'm hearing you're making the pitch to advertisers, and I think I actually co-sign all of this. I co-sign all of this truly, because I think that, look, man, if you can get yourself next to the right news outlet, look, man, look, 404 is a perfect example. 404, I'm pretty locked into 404 right now. 404media.co. Um, I read the newsletter basically every time it comes in. If there is somebody who's advertising shoes or whatever on this site, I will probably give them a second look, because I'm already primed to appreciate what 404 is doing. I mean, you sent me over this article here, which let me even pull this up. This one is the news trust halo: how advertising and news benefits brands. I mean, the
Yeah.
headline
So
the headline does it right there.
look, that's a organization, that has a rooting interest in all this. So I'm not saying this is scientific,
Sure,
but
sure.
this is research that shows that brands actually benefit from adjacency and association with news. And, I think in a world where it's pretty much fact free, like, we're all debating whether or not brands should be in news, there's
Yeah.
kind of no facts underlying any of this. But because I'm not aware of any, like, real studies that have been conducted on this. But this is a data point, right? And
Mm-hmm.
this is like, look, what little research there is shows actually the opposite is true. That news brands are highly trusted. That if you appear in them, even next to challenging material, it's not bad for your brand. It's actually good for your brand.
Precisely. And this is, again, if we want to talk about, the shift from the Mad Men to the Math Men, right? Using the whatever the gender neutral version of that is. Um, okay, the problem is not there's not a there's not necessarily a universal agreement or conclusion or consensus on what the math is. You know what I mean? Maybe there is some risk in having your ad on a news article that's talking about Ukraine. Maybe there maybe is a benefit. It could kind of go there's we actually have some data here that suggests potentially otherwise. And so unfortunately one of those is based on fear and one of those is based on opportunity. I don't know. But I want to come to a question. I want to come to a question from somebody who asked me. By the way, if anybody in chat has questions, feel free to throw them out at here. I feel like we're in the Q&A section. This one's from Samir. How do we shatter, eradicate, destroy the current funding structures and news? And so what I think this is getting at is we're talking about what advertisers can do. We're basically trying to convince a bunch of MBAs. No offense to y'all out there with MBAs. MBAs are people too, but we're trying to convince a bunch of advertisers that they should defend the news. Frankly speaking, their motivations are different from that of a journalist. That's just real. Is there a way to get away from advertising being the thing that subsidizes journalists getting out there doing the work?
I have two thoughts on this.
Okay.
One is when we talk about news you use in your life every day, I would suggest to people who want to be part of the solution and part of helping the news, perpetuate and exist, like just carve out a budget in your monthly budget, right? Just say, I'm going to spend $100, $200, whatever it is. This is my subscription budget. And, I'm going to put 404 in there. I'm going to put LA Times in there. I'm going to put whatever it is, and like rotate stuff out that isn't delivering for you, right? But just like set it and forget it. Set a limit on it. I'm saying like I'm getting nickel and dimed to death on subscriptions, so it's crazy. Like, and I think maybe one of those subscriptions I would say should be to like a bundler, like maybe Apple News or something. Even though I don't think that's great, it'll give you a taste of a lot of different things because you're just not going to be able to go subscribe to everything. Nobody can, right?
Right.
So I think that's one solution, because without subscribers, I think I can't be optimistic. I mean, advertising is not going to solve this by any stretch. And then the other thing that is even bigger is I think the streamers need to get involved. Right now, they're the sources of money for content. And right now they're pretty much out of the news. Like, okay, so Showtime and HBO obviously carried Vice News Tonight, which was very innovative of them when they did it. But you can imagine a world where local news moves to streaming, and you blew up that model. Like no anchors at the desks anymore. Like just stories, a la carte, targeted at your zip code, written and produced and hosted by local journalists. That would not be very expensive to do. Right now, no streamer is doing it. And I have to think that's where this is all going, because, 15 years ago, streamers they didn't do TV, but then Orange is the New Black happened. And then they didn't do sports. And now NFL Sunday Ticket's on YouTube TV, right? So they've actually broken kind of every wall of content except for news. So I think that news is next, and I hope that news is next, because that would be a way of getting news back into a content bundle that would serve people. And if you're asking people, if you're saying like, okay, we'd like you to cut the cord and not subscribe to Comcast or Time Warner, whatever cable company you have, which I did many, many years ago, how do you give them everything that they once wanted in their package? Part of that has to be news.
We're in such an interesting time, though, because I think it's precisely, maybe this does kind of relate back to the music thing that we were talking about at the beginning, where certain generation got really used to bootlegging music. I mean, honestly, that's how I learned how to get good at computers, was, again, because I was bootlegging music, and then I was breaking my family's computer, and then I was fixing the computer before my dad got home. And that's I think that's the story legitimately of an entire generation. And then once subscription services come along, again, you realize, I can just pay $9 or whatever it is a month, and I don't have to worry about breaking my computer. And also, it's okay if I'm outside and I forgot to download the new Daft Punk record. I can just listen to the Daft Punk record. I'm good, right? Because I can just connect, right? Obviously, Wi-Fi and 4G and all that helps, 5G and all that helps. Um, but that's all to say that yeah, that ended up changing. We got to a point where a certain generation came to the conclusion that you don't have to pay for music, but we became willing to pay for music when the convenience outweighed the costs. You dig what I'm saying? And so I think it's a hard sell, man, to tell somebody that, yo, you should pay for news, because who the hell pays for news? And we've gotten so used to it, not to information being completely free. The problem with that is we now have a culture where really heavily agenda driven stuff, and I just mean like foreign actor type agenda stuff, is the stuff that's free, because for them that's a cost of doing business. You do what I'm saying? Like legitimate actual propaganda. Yeah, let me just put some memes online and that stuff's free. You don't have to actually pay for stuff that people have to spend days and months and potentially years reporting out and finding the facts of something. You dig? So we're in this weird position now.
Yeah, no, I hear that. But I feel like I don't know how the readers feel, but just in my personal life, I feel like I'm hitting paywalls left and right now. Like
Yeah.
people are putting paywalls back, and you know, there's not enough content. Right? There's not enough great coverage of things that I'm interested in. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, I think that if there's no paywall, it's usually not great content. It can be. It can be great. It can be fine. It can be, I think big believer in blogs and people's perspectives and all that. But when it comes to reporting, usually if there's no paywall, there's kind of no business model for reporting. I mean, look, the layoffs of the Messenger, they launched with completely ad supported model, went for scale. And I think they did some pretty good stuff this year. Rocky start, but like I think there were some interesting stories that they did, but they're probably going to go away, right? And I think all ad supported, you know, if it's just ads alone, it's not going to be a great business. So I think you're going to find that you're just going to have to subscribe to some things.
Which then brings us back to a really good question we're having in the
Yeah.
chat now is, okay, how do poor people afford news? I think the
Right.
answer is they
So
can't.
yeah, I think that's a problem. So I think like the BBC is interesting. I don't think you'd want a BBC in America, right? Because if you like in England, the BBC just sucks all the oxygen out of every room, right? They're just a huge, like you talk to any journalist in England, and they've either worked at the BBC or they're gonna work it for the BBC. Like it's a monolith, right?
Right.
It's a it's a huge monolith. So I think I'm a little bit more interested in the nonprofit newsroom funding model. There's like
Mm.
a lot of these, Texas Tribune, Cal Matters. Um, I think this ecosystem, Baltimore Banner, is really really interesting. My critique of it is that there is in fact no market for quote unquote journalism, right? Nobody gets up in the morning and says, I'm gonna read some journalism today. Like, no,
No.
it doesn't
Yeah.
happen. You're
Yeah.
lucky if they want to read news, but mostly they just want to read stories, true stories. And I think that if the solution is journalism and just putting words on the internet, that's not going to solve a news desert, right? That's not enough. And I think that um, these nonprofit newsrooms are like amazing parts of the ecosystem, but they're never going to solve the problem alone. I also believe in big profitable journalism, because when you have big profitable journalism, then you can pay for the big lawyers you're going to need when somebody comes after you, because you're doing stories that are challenging people in power and or corporations or governments, or and like you can't do that if you're small. You actually have to be big.
That's a interesting point. Because another question we're getting in the chat is, okay, how do we protect? How does one even do journalism when there are tech billionaires or billionaires of any sort, really, who would much prefer for you not to do what you're doing in the way that you're doing it, criticizing their what they're doing, things like that.
Yeah,
Recurring theme recently.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that's why 404 I think is so important. I mean, I think the tech doesn't really have. I can't think of any. They shout and moan and complain, but they don't tend to like sue, right? Um, oh, one exception. I was actually almost sued by Google once. Um,
Can you talk
yeah,
about this?
take it back. Yeah, yeah. No, I had obtained a internal spreadsheet of search ad spending, and at the time, nobody knew who was spending what on Google. It's a
Mm.
complete black box. Now, of course, I think that information is pretty available. And I was about to publish it, and I pulled a story out of it, but I wasn't publishing the whole doc. I was just reporting from it. So it wasn't like I was putting their proprietary information out there for everyone to see. I was creating journalism from it. Um, and they threatened to sue, and then like immediately back down because we had like, First Amendment lawyers. It's funny, the First Amendment lawyers or newsroom lawyers well, the litigator we worked with at Vice, she was great because she was like, the First Amendment's so strong, we get tired of winning. It's like, it's like we got
Trump?
sued. Yeah, we got sued by some pretty big people, and some pretty well-known lawyers who've taken down other publications before. And we had just a great track record. It's the First Amendment is a wonderful thing, but look, even responding to a lawsuit costs money. So
Yeah,
that's what I'm talking about. Like, even
that is
if you
true.
don't ever go to court, there's a lot of costs associated with that. Look, we had a professional newsroom lawyer who was reviewing, every video we put out and a great many of the stories we were putting out. So that's expensive too.
Yeah, no, I mean you're right. Because look, there's stuff that I did at Vice when I was still there, and I'm the same human being. I have the same skill set, the same computers. You know what I mean? The same connection to the internet, and it'd be hard for me to write the same thing because I would know over there if somebody tries to come at me, somebody can at least take a look at the legal threat and say, "Nah, you're good." I gotta
Yeah.
hire somebody to take care. If I'm doing it independently, I gotta hire somebody to take care of it for me. So nah, you that would
Right.
be an argument for a larger organization where you can hire a lawyer on staff because that's important. AI don't fix everything.
So, yeah. So I would just say if there's any freelancers on this, um, in the audience here, to be careful of this, because a lot of freelance agreements, Vice thankfully changed theirs when I was there, because it's completely unfair. A lot of freelance agreements indemnify the publication if you ever get sued. So that will leave you out, vulnerable. You have to have, libel insurance.
Mm.
It's a terrible thing for freelancers. It's completely immoral. No media companies should take responsibility and defend the journalist, whether or not they're staff or freelance. That's absolutely ridiculous. And that was a terrible thing that leaked into freelance contracts over the last couple decades that was really negative.
You mentioned news deserts, and I don't want to let you go without referring to this briefly. But we talked about news deserts a little bit. You you know some things about news deserts. You've looked into this a bit. Um,
Yeah.
what is a news desert, and what kind of effect is that having on the entire conversation that we're talking about right now?
Yeah. So I think that I'm really interested in news deserts, both for what they are and then what their impact is.
Mm.
So if you look at a news desert, like Northwestern a couple of years ago came out with a study that showed 70 million Americans live in an area where there's no locally produced news at all. And then I think it was Times or the Journal. I think it was the Times had a story that said, "Oh, look at all these quote unquote newspaper chains. There are the communities where the newspaper itself has no local journalists, just carries network or wire copy.
Hmm.
So these are getting bigger and bigger. I think they correlate strongly. The social research now that is really interesting about this is they correlate strongly with extreme communities, extremistic communities. So extreme right wing communities are often news deserts, right? And that I think is a fascinating thing to watch, especially in this election coming up. Correlating news deserts with political outcomes is going to be really, really interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think this is a huge issue. I don't think that, I think nonprofits are a start. I don't think they're the solution. I think that I would love to see local television news reinvented. I think it's ripe for reinvention. I mean, most of us haven't watched a local newscast in a long time. If you did, you'd sort of be shocked at how silly they are. And I think that's an area where like there could be some real innovation. But it would take this, I think, streaming platforms to support it.
I'm gonna say my prediction for one way this could go actually is precisely what we're seeing right here. I think actually streaming is you say streamers, but I think actually live streams or versions of this are actually one potential way that local news could, I don't want to say make a comeback, but become a factor. I actually think that. Now it's going to take somebody with some nerve to actually be the first one to step out there and do it. But I think it's just like you're saying. You saw like TV wasn't really a thing on streamers, and then until it became a thing, and then everybody wanted to do it. Sports wasn't really a thing, and then until somebody tried it, and then it's frankly, unfortunately, the streamers do have a stranglehold on, and they're very a small collection of types of outlets kind of have a stranglehold on what sort of stuff can come out there, what can get out there because, frankly, of money.
Yeah, I think if you took, like, say, a nonprofit newsroom in a community and you tacked a show like this on top of it, where you had a host, like a miniature version of the model we were doing at Vice, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you had journalists on talking about their work, talking about what they're investigating, talking about what they're finding out. I think that's to me really interesting because I think of I think of the streaming model as a little bit more like kind of ambient talk radio where there's
Yeah.
some visuals, but people are often just listening. And
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I know I've had a lot of people tell me, "Oh yeah, I listened to your show. I listened to your streams." They're looking. It's okay. It's okay. Listen, however you pay attention, all 18 people who are watching right now, listening, whatever it is, thank you. I will take I don't care, man. If you're having this communicated to you via carrier pigeon every 5 minutes, we're good. Thank you. Yeah, man, I know I kept you for a while, but is there anything, I guess the last question, you sort of mentioned this, but look, in summary, I suppose, if you can either give some predictions or some suggestions, both as consumers and as journalists, clearly, advertising in its current state is definitely killing news. It's making it worse. Journalists agree on that with everybody. What can we do?
Um, I think directly what you can do is make that budget, whatever it is, $25, $50 a month, and just like plan for it and subscribe, right? I think that's great. And I think that's much better. I should take my own advice. Like I'll run to a paywall and I'll be like, oh, okay, gotta subscribe, right? Like just be a little bit more systematic about it and plan it out. And I really wish publishers would get better at allowing you to share subscriptions across a household. Like,
Mhm.
because like my wife and I are, and my daughter are constantly like, "What's the password for X?" And it's like a problem. And I just wish that they would just solve that, right? Because like
Yeah.
no newspaper asked every member of a household to subscribe. That's ridiculous, right?
No.
Like
Yeah.
one subscription should cover everybody. Um,
You can't win a
and
DMCA because you passed the Sunday, comics over
yeah,
to your friend. Yeah.
totally. Give me a break. I think gift articles are a great idea. Gift articles are amazing. That was so
Mhm.
smart. Um, and I think I don't know. I think like participate in the business model, the ad business model. When you see an advertiser supporting some great stuff, like click through. I mean, don't buy anything, obviously, but click through and I mean, buy nothing, right? And validate that decision. I think that would be that's a rational thing to do.
You
A
you
tiny
meant
little act.
it's something. You
It's a
mentioned that essentially a lot of these things like block listing things like the word gay in an article, and advertisers don't want to have their stuff next to that. You refer to that, basically this kind of stuff is sort of a doomsday document for news. uh what what do you think news is going to be like in 2024? What's your prediction? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Do we have reason
I
for
mean,
optimism?
in some ways, there's a flourishing of creativity. I mean, what you're doing in streaming, like that's a flourishing of creativity that is, TikTok, short form video, short form vertical video is incredible, I think, and like there's just a lot of great creativity happening, both in how to present news, but also how to gather news. Like I think
Mm,
404 and the guys, Jason and his team, like they're innovators in news gathering, right? Experts in FOIA and they're just really, really good, right? So I think that's positive, right? I love to see all that, and I think you know I actually think the political media has done a pretty good job so far, like in the election. I feel like they've done a good job of sort of not both sidesing issues where there really
yeah.
aren't two sides. I think the election is going to be a shit show. I think everyone believes that.
Yeah.
Um, but I think it won't. It may not be as bad as people think. I mean, I think we're all like much smarter media consumers. Like I mean, I think
Are the
the
journalists smarter though?
yeah, yeah,
Because we didn't look, man. We didn't do a good job in 2016, man. We both know that.
it was terrible. It was terrible. Um, yeah,
Are we going to do a better job as an industry? Do you think we'll do a better job this time?
I think so. I mean, I think that wall of like that's a lie was broken. So I think that's positive. We don't have to just like lay out the facts and let the readers figure it out, right? We can actually help a little bit. You know, um, I think in a lot of ways, like unlike 8 years, 9 years ago, unlike 2016, people actually know what they're getting this time. Like, and there was
Mm.
some mystery around that time. So, and people are understanding the real impacts. Like vast swaths of this country, like abortion's now illegal, right? That's a real impact on a lot of people. Um, trans people are crossing borders to get medication,
Yeah.
and, just basic healthcare. So, I mean, there's some real impacts that people are experiencing that um, they weren't experiencing in 2016.
Hopefully, we do a little better this time.
Yeah.
Inshallah. All right, man. Thank you for sticking
All
around
right.
so long. Yeah. Chat, everyone. Thanks. Please thank Mike Learmonth for coming through. Um, anytime, please. Anytime, please come back. I'd love to have you back on, man.
Oh
Um,
man, it's a pleasure.
appreciate you, man.
Thank you. Thanks everybody.